In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota/Quantico, southern Ontario. It was a massive wilderness area of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts, and we were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as a result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here is the account in full. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us in total, the maximum allowed in a group per armed permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adult advisors, scoutmasters, and myself. They wanted to do a 200-miler, but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend our route. They're all bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so a waterfall is somewhat rare, but that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near to it. That evening I had the boys working on camp setup, while the advisors worked on fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of downed trees, brush, and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left, when out of nowhere I hear the most unearthly scream/roar I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks and I was frozen. The second scream was closer, and the third closer. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush. But whatever this was, it was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could barely feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream almost physically hurt, but it snapped me back to reality and I ran back to camp. My crew had luckily heard it too. But what am I going to tell them? I claimed it was a boar. There's no boar up there, and the advisors knew I was lying, but didn't call my bluff. After dinner, they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards from camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock at about head height, so about 6 feet up. I would use a top over my body and head to keep the morning dew off and the morning mosquitoes at bay. But the top wasn't strung up. That's important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been about 3 to 4 a.m. when I was awakened by what sounded to me like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I'm hearing something walking through the thick brush, down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet, as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from brush to granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footfalls as it walked right through camp, and on towards me. At this point, the top is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was staying right next to me. I could hear the breathing, long and congested sounding. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence, only inches from my body. Just standing there. Time to make a decision. I suddenly threw the top off my head, and as I did this, my left hand touched this thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The musculature was impressive. Bodybuilder status pectoral is what I touched. It all happened in a second. As soon as my hand made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through it. So I read until sunset, and I decided not to mention it. The next day we moved on a few miles towards base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designed by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. We were just arriving and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling and he came running back to the camp, still pulling his pants up, and said that he'd just seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if maybe it was a bear, and he said absolutely not. That he'd hunted bears for years, and it was not no bear. It was a monkey, and it was about 9 feet tall. At this high estimate, I'm imagining being back in my hammock. If I touched the chest and was about 6 feet off the ground, that puts the head close to 9 feet up. Was it stalking us? Was there more than one? The boys are now scared. Time to mitigate. I suggest a night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack back up and set out about 8 p.m. and paddle by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back onto Moose Lake and camp very near the base so we could be the first crew off water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfoundland Lake by a small pinch in a channel of water that's not very deep or wide. There's dark woods on both sides. We were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock the size of a basketball came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missed the bow of the canoe I was steering. There's no cliff there. This thing was forcefully thrown at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and we sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled to the base camp and ended our expedition. They did not want to talk about what happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard helping crews offload. Our buddy Justin got back that day from a trip in the same area we had been in, Bear Loop, and I was helping him put a boat on the rack. I noticed he had a distinct look. Almost 1,000-yard stare. I asked him how his trip went, and he said it was all good until they hit Knife Lake or Newfoundland Lake. He said they were being messed with for 2 nights on Knife, and then had a rock thrown at them in Newfound Pinch. Sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after that, crews kept coming back from that area with very similar stories. One night there was a crowd of us guys in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then from the back corner of the room I heard a chuckle. It's one of the old veteran guides who's been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time somebody else seen one." I asked how long he'd known they were there for. He said he's been encountering them for 10 years. Then he said, "They talk to me." This shocked me. Like a language, I asked. No, they communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like it when you're afraid. It's like a game to them. What happened out there is still a big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way that veteran guides spoke of their intelligence and parapsychological abilities. How they can read human emotion as clear as pages in a book. That they know our species better than we know ourselves. Work and live in the rural Midwest outdoors. There are things that live out here with me. I'll start this off by saying I grew up completely, 100% adamant that the paranormal isn't real. It can all be rationalized, and that people who believed in it haven't thought about it hard enough. I've made other posts on other subs about paranormal events that have happened in my life recently that have completely changed my mind. Primarily about my neighbor's house. That's not what I'll talk about today, though. I live in the Midwest. I live on a small, rural lot between a cornfield and a small forest and a camper. I've lived in this county my entire life. I know the entire county like the back of my hand. This being said, I've come to the conclusion that my experiences around the rural and wooded parts of this county are crawlers. I'm 100% sure of it. I've had many encounters, actually. None back to back, but they happen frequently. There's a forest, or park, in the middle of the town I always hated at night since I was little. As I got older, my cousin and I thought that getting scared was really fun. We'd go there all night on purpose, but never lasted long. I always felt like I was being watched. This, on top of urban legends of people going missing here at night, made me feel really uneasy. Fast forward to a few years ago. I got married and am settling into life as a husband. I take my large all-black German Shepherd, Fenrir, on walks with me at night. I always walk towards the park, but I usually don't enter into it. The first time something weird happened was about 5 years ago. I was walking Fenrir in the woods. The front and to the right of me, to the left and behind me, was a neighborhood edge and a small playground. Went silent. My dog started acting super anxious. He's usually a very stoic and quiet dog. He's 120 pounds and built like a tank. Looks very intimidating, and he knows it. I heard rustling in the woods following me, and I felt like I was being stalked. I ran home, and that's the end of the first encounter. I had a few more encounters like that. Last year, things really amped up. I was on a walk around 11:30 with Fenrir, my wife, and our little newer dog, Booger. He's a terrier-chi mix. We were walking down the same path, and about 3 blocks away from the woods, 4 or so deer are sprinting out of the trees in the street towards us, and they seem terrified. Then I hear what I can only describe as what sounded like a human trying to mimic the sounds of a monkey. I thought it was really silly until recently, when I read that other guy's story who heard the same fucking thing. We laughed it off as some kids playing around. Once we get up to the woods and walk in parallel, we can clearly see 2 reflective eyes and a silhouette staring us down from the tree line. We also heard a deep growl, and then like a hissing sound. But it wasn't super high-pitched or anything. Both our dogs acknowledged this as well. Finn stared and Booger growled a bit. I made a Facebook post on the community's Facebook group, and other people told similar stories about around town. Around this time, I got a job as a tour guide / maintenance for rail explorers. I'm working there again this year as well. We start April 1st. Basically, they take unused or tour-specific railroad sections that aren't used federally, and they have these paddle carts with motor assist on them you can use to explore the tracks. It's super cool and super fun. The one I work at is like 5 minutes from where I live, and it goes through the woods and an inaccessible part of the county unless you flow down the river and hike up steep, loose dirt hills. You go under one old car bridge, and you go over 2 multi-100-foot-length old train bridges. The first one is larger and taller. It's about 150 feet off the ground above the forest. The second goes over the river, about 6 months into the job, and it's fall. We work until midnight, sometimes with the last tour leaving around 9 p.m. That means the last tour for the last 2 months of the year are in complete darkness. The way that job operates is with 6 employees. 4 get on the lead bike, and 2 get on the rear bike. From the lead bike, we can drop off 1 person at the busy intersection, as they can flag traffic, and 1 person gets dropped off at the large train bridge that goes over the woods. The person at the bridge gives a short safety speech to the customers who stop and go, 1 at a time over the bridge. The employee carts are much faster than the customer ones. We all have walkie-talkies, and we usually have these battery-powered floodlights on stands we can use so the customers can see us, and light up safety vests. On one particular night, we were behind by 20 or so minutes. Instead of leaving the depot at sunset, we were leaving at dusk. I was stationed at the high bridge. By the time we reached the bridge, it was pitch black aside from the stars providing a little light. My co-workers dropped me off and waited with me until the first customer arrived. I gave the little speech to that first carter for. I chatted with them for a bit. I was trying to buy some time and wait for the next customer cart, so there was a massive gap for my co-workers who have to flip the bikes around. After a few minutes, I let the customers leave, and I was alone. I was alone for 20 minutes. I used the radio so many times, but it was static for everybody. One of the only times we've ever had an issue like that as well. I kept seeing movement in the tree line. I kept hearing fast footsteps all around me in every direction. I had the floodlight on above my head so everyone and everything could see me, but I couldn't see shit. I turned off the floodlight and used my personal flashlight. I kept seeing quick glimpses of pale skin moving quickly. But right when I started seeing stuff, I could hear the next customer car coming close. So I turned the light back on and waited for them to come around the corner. When they pulled up, I noticed they had a little boy with them, and he's scared of the dark. I'm terrified at this point, but I have to act appropriate. Even more so because this boy, I don't want to scare him. As I'm finishing my speech, I hear movement right behind me and say, "Jesus fucking Christ," and spin around with my flashlight on instinct. Poor kid. I told them it was probably just a deer, and they're good to go across the bridge. The same night, the person stationed at the intersection, this isn't like a town intersection, is very rural. It's right next to a massive cornfield. He's Native American and was very in tune with this creature. He told me privately a few weeks later he heard rustling in the cornfield. Whatever was out there was whispering his name and trying to get him to the field. He was also without a communication for those 20 minutes. But he was in the woods and could see a lot better than me. Another time, me and Mike, the same co-worker, were headed back on the front car. We were way ahead, so we stopped the car in the middle of the high bridge. Sounds scary. I'm a bit afraid of heights, and this bridge has massive gaps within the planks you could fit through, but after doing it so often, you get used to it. It was a clear night, and we were watching the stars and having small talk. Then it goes silent. We are 100 or so feet in the air above the woods. We can hear for miles. The dogs barking across the river 2 miles can be heard without even seeing houses. We hear what sounds like a human mimicking a monkey noise, and we hear growling. He looks at me, completely serious, and tells me in a stern voice that we need to get off the here right now. I drive the fuck out of there, and he moved states to Nevada shortly after this. A few other things happened here and there and to co-workers as well. Each of my co-workers have at least one story. I'm only sharing mine in this post, otherwise it'd be too long. A few months go by and it's late fall, around the middle of November. I drive through that park in town a lot when I just want to go for a drive. I had my dog Fenrir with me and it's around 2 a.m. I can't sleep, so I'm listening to a Melvin CD and driving leisurely through the park. As soon as I get past the entrance gates, I feel really uneasy and weird. I'm not easily scared. Going to the park at night makes me feel a primal fear. It's beyond fight or flight. I've never felt that way in my life anywhere else, ever, and I feel it every time I'm there. I'm driving through the park and I've rolled up the windows up a lot more. Fenrir can still poke his head out but can't leap out. As I go deeper into the woods, I feel worse and worse. I decided not to turn around because I'm already past the halfway point. Turning around would make me stay in the woods longer. I started speeding where there weren't turns. I couldn't see around the last corner, and what I saw made me have nightmares for months. There was a pale, skinny, humanoid. Tall and lanky but not quite human. Fucking crawling on its hands and feet. But it was crawling fast as fuck, 20 miles an hour type shit. We don't have bears here. The only animal that size are larger of humans and deer. That wasn't a deer. Went from my right, crossed the street, and went into the tree line. Fenrir saw it too. He doesn't bark at animals, not even other dogs, but he went ballistic. He was trying to force himself out of the small gap in the window, nearly foaming at the mouth and snarling. He never, ever acts like that. I'm a certified dog trainer, and I've raised him from birth. Most recently, I've become obsessed with this park. I've walked there at night from my camper to the park with Fenrir. I'll never do it again. I didn't see a figure this time. As I was entering the park, a massive owl flew by my head so close I could have smacked it mid-flight. This made me feel weird for the same reason. As soon as I get to the park, I feel extremely weird, anxious, and nauseous. Walk a few hundred yards to the only streetlight in the entire park, and I turn around and face the woods. Me and Fenrir stand there, frozen for like 10 minutes. The silence was deafening. Anytime I heard anything, I'd jump. Finn was anxious as hell too. He kept staring into a certain spot in the woods a ways off. I swear I saw eyes in there every once in a while. I built up the courage to walk out and haven't gone back since. It'll be interesting to see what happens at my job this year. I wanted to add that the county I live in is packed full of abandoned mines. Hundreds of them.